Mike Fanelli, thank you for joining me on the Steadfast Running podcast.
Thank you. Really pleased to be here.
You are a lifelong runner, a coach that was fortunate enough to work at one point with world-class runners. You are a track and field historian, which is actually how I got to know you through your posts on Facebook. And so, on behalf of the running community, thank you for serving as one of the sport's chief ambassadors.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Very kind.
I imagine you are good friends with guys like Roger Robinson and Larry Rawson, two names that come immediately to mind when thinking about our sports cultural storytellers. And perhaps you'll be writing your own book in the near future. Actually, I thought, Mike, we could start with you treating our listeners to a quick anecdote, artifact, or slice of track and field history, because I know I can't be the only one who just eats this stuff up.
Well, it's kind of funny. What I oversee is what I reference as the track and field garage. It's the stuff in my garage, which is actually a separate building on our property. But like every passion, it begins with one. Whether it's your passion to begin running, and you have to take that first step. You got to run that first mile before you can run the 100th mile, or in my case, the 100,000th mile. The track and field garage is an archives. It's it follows the history of the sport, really from the 1800s, primarily the U.S. sport, but not solely and exclusively. And the very first item that was collected was as I was a 12-year-old, shortly after, just a couple months after the 1968 Olympic Games at Mexico City. A couple of months later, the first big indoor meet, or the national championships, were held in Philadelphia. And as a 12-year-old, I got to attend those, which is where I grew up. And anybody that had that standard classic USA navy blue uniform with a red and white piping, I knew that they had to have been in the Olympic Games, which I had just gotten done watching on the black and white Philco television. And so I chased them all down and I got their autographs and just reveled in the whole meet. It was wonderful. I actually got to see in my very first track meet a world record. George Young set the world record for the 3 mile, which, on an 11-lap track is 33 laps. You have to know, for a 12-year-old boy watching this guy zoom around the track 33 times. I mean, how did he keep track, right? So at any rate, I got his autograph as well. And so that particular meet program was the first item that I collected. And that was on March 3rd, 1969. So just over 52 years ago. And then since then, the garage archives, the track and field history museum of sorts, is now in excess of 4,000 pieces. And it includes all kinds of neat stuff, including the very first ever indoor track meet program from 1868, and items like that that far predate the very first March 3rd, 1969 program. That's kind of how it got started. For many years, it was just kind of happenstance. Would I find something that was cool and collected it, but didn't have any rhyme or reason. About 25 or so years ago, I started really kind of focusing on, we need to make this tell a story, and one that can tell the backstory on the history of the sport. Kind of cultural storytelling was my idea, and reaching back as far as we could and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, so that if you walk through the archives and go through it from a chronological stance, and I have everything organized in a chronological stance, it tells the history and the background of this great sport of ours.
Amazing stuff. You could charge admission to this track and field garage, couldn't you?
I don't know about that, but
I'm just joking, but it's just incredible, the collection you have amassed. And Mike, we could go into your early days as a runner, but I think other podcasts have already done a good job of that. Listeners can refer to Mario Fraioli's Morning Shakeout podcast, episode 98, for that side of the story. He did a really good job. Mike, I'd rather lead off with a different sort of question. It's middle of the afternoon where you're at right now in the Bay Area. Did you have a workout today?
Absolutely. I don't miss a day. I'm one of those guys, and it's not OCD. Instead it's discipline. Perhaps it's my background as a former United States Marine, but and maybe it's because I actually write down every single workout that I do ever since I was 14. So yeah, I don't miss a day. The last time I missed a day was day before Thanksgiving last year, and it was only because I was doing a turkey trot the next day, and I wanted to feel sprightly.
What kind of run was it today, and what's the mileage tally at currently?
So I'm at 113,800, and I think around 30, and just crossed 100, and yeah, I just hit so just a little bit 113,800. And this morning's workout was a 4-mile run, easy mile warm up, and then a 2-mile all out time trial up a hill that takes 18 to 19 minutes to run up this hill. It's a long hill right outside my gate, and then an easy cool down. So medium effort day.
Okay, thanks for sharing. You were a 225 marathoner back in the 1980s, and now you're over 113,000 miles, like you said. You're 65 years old, correct me if I'm wrong. Many runners who started training early in life, like you did, and trained at a high level, are either forced into retirement due to injuries, or their desire to continue competing tapers off. What has kept you healthy and motivated, you think?
Well, there's always a new frontier to accomplish. There's always new objectives, whether it be age group and modern day PRs versus, I'm never going to run a personal best, but I can run a modern day personal best. And, the age groups every five years, that's cool to keep things exciting. I've really mixed it up over the years, and that has a lot to do with it. I started out in high school. I ran a lot of half miles, 800s, or there were 880s back then because we were still doing yards, of course. Collegiately, I ended up running largely the 5,000 meters and the 10,000 meters. And then I just continued to move up in distance, moved up beyond the marathon into the ultra marathons, ran 50 miles and 100 Ks, 72 miles around Lake Tahoe, 100 miles, around 100 miles in 16 hours and 40 minutes on the track, no less. Then my next race after the 100 miles was 800 meters. So just worked it right back down to where I started from. And so the last 15 or 20 years, I've been running more masters track and field. I did run under 5 minutes for a mile at the age of 50, which was a long-term goal, was to break 5 at 50, which is pretty good. And now I've got 6 races coming up, ranging from 800 meters to 5,000 meters on the track. So I stay interested by mixing it up and having fun. The thing about people that I trained with and grew up training with in the 70s and the 80s that don't run anymore, as you mentioned, a lot of them are injuries, and a lot of them are just when you ran fairly fast at a younger age, relatively fast, it's really hard to it can be hard to cope with the fact that, wow, you can't run 1 mile at the pace that you ran your marathon. I mean, and you have to work really, really hard to do it. And just so it doesn't seem, it's a little embarrassing for some folks. I think that's part of the deal why many of my colleagues. And then relative to injuries. So, the thing about running at this age, it's not as much about the training. It's about everything that's in between the training, so the recovery phase. And that takes a whole lot of discipline and ancillary work in order to do this. So I think that's why folks don't do that. And I really kind of focus on the period of time in between training sessions.
Okay, good advice. the next goal you're chasing, it sounds like you're doing a lot of masters track and field events, 800 to 5,000. What's the next goal, the next specific goal that you're chasing? And do you have a time in mind that you'd like to hit? Or are you thinking about winning your age group?
Well, so more immediately, this year is an important year for me in that in 1972, as a 16-year-old, I ran my first marathon, and I'll be 66 in a couple of weeks. So to run a marathon 50 years after running your first marathon, not too many folks have accomplished that. So that's big on my agenda, is to run the marathon again 50 years thereafter. And so I'm contemplating the Santa Rosa Marathon in Sonoma County here. That's not set in stone, but come hell or high water, I'm running a marathon this year, even if I have to crawl.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because I don't know if you feel the same way, but running marathons past a certain point, unless you've won the genetic lottery, just doesn't seem like the best thing you can do if you want to have a very long career. This is just my opinion. I'm
It's a good
finding
opinion.
that even for someone like me who hasn't hit 40 yet, but has been running for over 20 years, including a fair share of marathon running, I'm finding that it's better to focus on 5K and 10K road races if I want to be running the way you are as you get closer to 70.
Yeah, the marathon is not a natural distance. There's no way to get through it, without being beat up. And I'll be really candid. I find it way easier to run 50 miles than the marathon, because you go out for 50 miles and you just, gun goes off and I'm just out here for a cruise, an adventure, and an experience. And you're just, but the marathon, if you're racing the marathon, you're pretty much full tilt right from the beginning, and you're guaranteed you're going to run out of glycogen. I don't care, especially back in the day when there wasn't any of the glucose polymer drinks and goos and all that. You're going to hit the wall. You're going to break down. The impact, the training that it takes is so brutal. So yeah, the marathon is not the best way to add longevity to your career. Hence the idea of being able to do one 50 years, a half a century after your first one is it's not for the faint of heart, let me tell you that. And it won't be easy. Regardless of the time, it won't be easy.
Oh, we wish you well. I'm just curious. You said you broke the 5-minute barrier for the mile at age 50. What are you running in the 800 nowadays?
The All-American standard for men 65 to 69 is 2 minutes and 55 seconds. And so for me, that's one of those things you asked about earlier, the motivation. When you get to these kind of elevated ages and you're still able to run at all, it's cool to go after those kind of benchmarks, the All-American standards. And so yeah, that something in that general realm. I was never an 800-meter runner, a real 800-meter runner. I have no business running the 800. I love the 800. It is so exhilarating. Gun goes off, you're in lanes, you run the entire first curve in the lanes, you come out of the turn, everybody's breaking for the pole at the exact same time. That is exhilarating. And you absolutely know, no way heck you're going to get through that race without eventually feeling like you're just dying and running through quicksand, right? Whether it happens at 200 to go or 180 to go or 90 to go, you're gonna really struggle. So you have to get your head right. So I love the idea that it's fast, it's intense, it's exhilarating, and that sort of thing. But yeah, 800-meter racing. Whew. The good news is, it's temporary.
Right. I agree with you. That distance is brutal yet poetic. Is there a race that sticks out in your memory, Mike, whether it was a record-setting day for you in your prime, or just an experience that comes to mind right now off the top of your head that proves, hey, running can be so much fun?
I don't know that I thought running was ever fun until much later. I think that it was a goal, it was a challenge. I liked the measurability of it. You have a distance, you have a time. It's absolute black and white. It's not subjective. It's completely objective, and measured and comparable. And so I found more joy in running much later, after the highlights of my career. So, I will tell you that in a career, running career, I've been on more than 1,000 starting lines, and you have these little breakthroughs, and you have the little special races, and maybe I've only had 10 or 15 or 20 of those races, but they happen. And for me, I think some of those really cool breakthroughs were the first time you break 5 minutes for the mile, which I did as a high school sophomore. Or the first time you win a race, you break the finish line tape. Back then we had tape; it was a string, right? And those sorts of things. Interestingly, I mentioned running my first marathon in 1972. I didn't end up winning a marathon until 16 years later. 16 years from running the first one to win. Now that was a big thrill. So there's been lots of those kinds of fun, thrilling kind of moments along the way. But it's got to be something you want to do because you want to, you're looking for personal accomplishment. And fun is like going for an easy trail run with your buddies and having a couple beers thereafter. Okay, that's fun, right?
Right. Which marathon did you win in 1988?
I won the San Francisco Pacific Rim Marathon, and I was fortunate to win it 2 years in a row, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, you never forget your first one.
Pardon me?
You never forget that first one.
No, oh no. I ended up, so when I won that, then I ended up winning 3 out of the next 4 marathons I ran, which was really weird because I was way past my prime. My marathon PR is 1980, so 8 years after your PR and 16 years after your first marathon, that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, one of my favorite road races is the Peachtree Road Race.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking off air about other races like Beta Breakers or the Dipsea Trail Race. Which race would you recommend someone like me do if they only had the opportunity to travel once or twice in their lifetime?
Well, I don't know if they still do it, but the Crescent City Classic 10K in New Orleans, what a cool race that is. Jambalaya at the finish line. Are you kidding me? It's great, point to point, finishes in Audubon Park. I love that race. Everybody's got to run the New York City Marathon if they can. There is nothing like the New York City Marathon. It's just, it's incomparable, right? So those are a couple. Boulder is pretty neat. The old Cascade Runoff 15K in Portland was extraordinary. I don't know. There's a lot of good ones. You mentioned the Peachtree. Peachtree's a neat race, except for that it's usually so darn hot and humid on 4th of July. Ay, Dios mío.
You gave us plenty there, Mike. Thank you. So thinking about all the legends that have made their mark on our sport, and in your case, you've probably met in person a lot of these legends, whether they are or they were famous runners, famous coaches, or what have you. Who would you like to go for a run with if you had the opportunity to run alongside them and chat?
You're right that I've had the good fortune of meeting most of the players in the sport at all distances, whether it be Carl Lewis at the 100 meters or Bill Rogers or, in the marathon, or Frank Shorter, all the names. And I've run with many of them, not Carl Lewis so much. But, I've had the good fortune of meeting Roger Bannister, the first ever sub 4 minute miler, but I never did get to run with Roger Bannister. Now that would be cool, right? Friends with Jim Ryan and spent good time with him, and lots of really neat and interesting people. And let me say this about my experience with those sorts of name athletes, that 99.9% of them are really cool, down to earth human beings. They put their pants on the same way as you and I do, one leg at a time. Very nice, very forthcoming. It's really the exception to the rule that somebody's kind of, not that way.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll throw a name out there, and most likely you know who this person is, being such a student of the sport that you are. Ernst van Aken,
Hmm.
who coached Harold Norpoth to a silver medal in the 5,000 meters. I think that's someone who I would like to go on a run with, just because his pure endurance method, that long, slow distance way of running, worked for me a few years back. Surprisingly, I gave it a shot and it worked. So I'd like to pick his brain on that pure endurance method of training.
Yeah, the Van Aken method. Boy, I haven't even thought about that in so many years. It was really kind of, he was prominent, became more prominent in the 70s at the dawning of long distance running craze in the United States. But like you mentioned, he had been coaching Harold Norpoth, who is Steve Prefontaine's utter and complete nemesis. And interestingly, the women's the running movement in the early 70s. He was involved with the pioneering of women's running in the sport. My dear friend Dr. Joan Ulyat was close with him. You might remember her as a pioneer. But yeah, the Van Aken method was is really it holds true today. Those precepts for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not surprised you recognize the name right away. Are there any books on training or about the history of the sport that you think should be on every serious runner's bookshelf? I know you're a big reader yourself.
Relative to training, so anything Lydiard or Percy Cerruti, either of those. I did not ever get to meet the great Percy Cerruti. He was the coach of Herb Elliott, and arguably, if not the greatest, one of the greatest milers ever in the history of the sport. And Peter Snell was coached by Arthur Lydiard. So those are two people. And Lydiard's concepts. I mean, pretty much everybody to this day in distance running does some form or another of the Lydiard approach to training. I had the privilege of emceeing a clinic of his and spending some time with him. Wow, that was enlightening.
Yeah, yeah. I went through an entire phase in my coaching where I was Lydiard all the way, like by the book, and he's definitely taught us a lot. The general
Hill
principles,
bounding? Did you do the hill bounding?
even the hill bounding.
Yeah. And the 22-mile or hilly 22-mile, no matter what distance you compete at, right?
Yeah, yeah, because that was my intent, was to follow it to the T.
Cool.
Because a lot of coaches say, we're Lydiard disciples, but are you truly following what Run to the Top says?
Well, I will tell you what then my absolute all-time favorite running book is the book about Peter Snell, the 800-meter runner and 1,500-meter runner from New Zealand. And it's called No Bugles, No Drums. It's out of print. You can find it, on some of those sites, but really cool. And of course, he, is the key student of Arthur Lydiard, and so you get kind of a firsthand approach. It's not a training book. It's it follows his career, and fabulous career. My single favorite book. So that would probably be, back to your original question. Boom. No bugles, no drums.
Yeah, great book. And after he became an exercise physiologist, he said he would train exactly the same way. I think he said maybe he would do some repetitions in the base phase, but that was just a minor tweak he would make to Lydiard's system.
Have you read it?
I have not. Like you said, it's hard to find.
Hard to find, but yeah, it's completely worth it. Wow, you'll totally dig it.
Yeah. Mike, with your background in marketing, I thought I'd ask you this question. Do you think track has lost some of its popularity amongst the blue collar runner crowd compared to what it was like in the 70s, for example? And is it possible to regain some of that marketability or even desirable, really, in your opinion?
I think that, so the sport of track and field during the 50s and the 60s was, one of the primary sports in America. But, with the um, added focus on, professional sports like basketball, football, and the television of those, it became, only popular during Olympic years. And we had great teams. I mean, if you look at the American teams in 1956 and in 1968, they're the two probably the best U.S. Track and field teams at the Olympic Games, strong into the 70s. But one thing that happened to the sport, aside from being overwhelmed with in the media by the professional U.S. Based sports, was in the 90s. The sport of track and field in the United States just went on, a total downslide. Participation at the junior high and high school level was down, and we were just as a team, the United States national team, we were just really not that good. So that didn't help. But then starting about 15 or 20 years ago, the sport has kind of picked up more and more, and IAAF, now World Athletics, has done a really nice job of marketing the sport internationally. There's much more television of the sport. So I think the sport is really, really healthy right now, much healthier than it had been. But if you ask me about the 90s, I don't even want to talk about them.
Right. Well, I came around as a runner in high school during that second running boom when Dathan Ritzenhein and Ryan Hall and Alan Webb were coming out of high school. That was truly a revival here in the United States.
It was. Yep, a revival. Well said.
Yeah. Well, I'm a nostalgic person, so of course, if I were in charge, I would probably be hyper focused on the past, and not to go too deep into this rabbit hole, but my initial reaction to the super shoes was one of outrage, right? How can we allow this to happen? Times don't mean anything anymore, yada, yada, yada. And then I realized that I haven't been around long enough to appreciate that this seismic shift in performance outcomes has happened several times before. For example, when we went from leathery shoes to EVA midsoles, from cinder tracks to synthetic tracks, pacemaking entered the sport later on. And so never mind the comparison between 208 and 201 in the marathon. What about someone like Jim Peters, right? The first man under 220. What could he have run in the Vaporflies? So the comparisons, right? The comparisons are impossible because track and field never standardized its equipment, right? What are your thoughts on the super shoes?
Well, they really make a difference. And I can tell you that firsthand, having recorded every single workout that I've ever done, handwritten, since October of 1970. I have meticulous record keeping, and I got a pair of the super shoes recently, crazy amount of money, but I got them not because I wanted to run faster. I understood that they felt more protective. And when you're, a little achy, like you can imagine I am, and I was so impressed that in my very first run, that wow, most of my owies didn't hurt anywhere near as much. But then I looked at my time, and on a standardized course, one that I'd run, easily 100 times and timed, I ran a time that was like that I hadn't run in like 4 years, and I'm not getting any younger. So, and every time I've run in them, and now I've probably run in them 8 or 9 times, every single time, I run, a time that was really remarkable to me. So they do work. Are they fair? Yeah, because everybody has got access to them. can you compare times from today and in the past? No, it's not a fair comparison. It just, it just isn't. And even my friends at Track and Field News magazine, they're like, "What? How do we differentiate the times from today in record keeping?" It's there's an asterisk, but what do? You keep track of every performance and who was wearing super shoes and who wasn't, or do you pick a line in the sand, a date, the times are X. So I think it's, it'll evolve naturally. It'll just, people will say, oh yeah, it's kind of like, like you mentioned about the old tracks and the new tracks and that sort of a thing. But yeah, there's somebody running 27:05 for 5,000 meters today probably was running 27:35, in previous years. It's really, it's crazy, but it is what it is. The only good thing I'll say about it is, again, that this particular aid, so to speak, is available to anybody and everybody. Anybody can afford it, that is.
Yeah, it is fair. It is fair. Just being a numbers guy and loving the statistics aspect of our sport, it's a tough pill to swallow, but we'll adapt.
Yeah, I will tell you that I was speaking with a former world champion, a two-time world champion, earlier this week, and we got into that dialogue, because his times were, American record times, and won numerous world championships, and all he can do is just shake his head. It's just, it is what it is, right? You see these guys' records going down. They're losing their records and falling down in the all-time top 10 or whatever. And then they're just, oh man, if I had those shoes, I would have done X and Y and Z. So at any rate, it is what it is.
All right, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I'd like to make a transition to your coaching career. Could you talk about how you got into coaching, some of your mentors along the way, and how you got the opportunity to coach at the national level?
Yeah, so I will say that ever since I was a kid, so I never had a good, knowledgeable high school coach. I just didn't. My coaches did just, they had other jobs. One was a mailman, for instance, and he had rudimentary, understanding, but no science and that sort of thing. So from the time I was, a kid, I would read, things like Van Aken. I would read Percy Cerruti, Lydiard. I'd, assemble a lot of, my own knowledge through research, books that you could get at the library, articles in magazines like, back then, Runner's World. And that sort of a thing was actually a bona fide magazine relative to understanding the sport and the practical application of science to sport, and became my own guinea pig, and generally ended up, pretty much ended up coaching myself, even in college, although I had, my college coach was a fantastic coach. He ended up becoming the coach for Ashton Eaton, greatest American decathlete ever. But it wasn't a distance coach. So I always, relied on my own knowledge and essentially wrote my own workouts. So, you learn by doing, so understanding and having the knowledge, but then, you have to be able to take the knowledge and make practical applications of that knowledge. So initially, as I mentioned, I was my own guinea pig. I started coaching. I was asked to coach a very casual group in San Francisco, in the, I don't know, probably about 25 years or so ago. And we had some, some decent, runners, local runners. And it gave me the opportunity to apply some of that knowledge. And then I got much more interested in the science of the sport. And in so doing, I had the privilege of getting to know two of the most prominent exercise physiologists in the United States, Dr. Dave Martin, who was out of Atlanta, by the way, who wrote the ultimate science book, along with Peter Coe, Sebastian Coe's dad. It's not an easy read, it's a lot of science, But then get to spend time with guys like that. And Dr. Joe Vigil, the foremost exercise physiologist in the sport of running and track and field in the United States and arguably the world, was my mentor. I got to know Joe and Dave, Joe in particular, during a period of time I spent in the marketing department at Reebok during the heyday of that particular brand in the 80s. I was in charge of running and running promotions, and we had Dr. Joe Vigil as one of our ambassadors. And so I spent a lot of time with Joe. I traveled a lot with Joe. We were roommates at the World Cross Country Championships in Spain. We were roommates at the NC2As. So I got to spend a lot of time with them, and still do, when given the fact that we're at the same big events. And from guys like that, on top of, in addition to the earlier pioneers that we've already discussed, Van Aken, Mr. Rudy later, was able to put together a lot of history and knowledge. I was then asked, because I demonstrated some success, to coach the largest all-women's running team in the United States. It's called the Impala Racing Team out of San Francisco. And it was a really interesting team, because it wasn't just about speed, or you had to qualify to be on the team, but you didn't have to qualify necessarily by how fast you were, but whether or not you could work with the chemistry of the team. And it was more, first and foremost, it was about the promotion of the sport for women. So I had a really wide variety of athletes that I was working with, from barely being able to break 4 hours for the marathon to Olympic trials qualifiers in the marathon. So that was a great opportunity to demonstrate the science principles and apply them on an individual basis. And so I think that, all that being said, what I really took away from all of that in being able to write a training program was that the two keys are individuality, and more importantly, optimality. So, optimality meaning that every athlete has a different training threshold based upon their current level of conditioning. And you don't move to that next level of speed until you've demonstrated in a time trial or a race that you've made that change. So optimality, and individualization is so very important.
Yeah. And we're going to discuss principles such as individualization or optimizing your training later on. I definitely want to get to that. But there's just so much gold in what you just shared with us. I've said this before on the podcast, that Joe Vigil has had the biggest impact on my views on training. So he's and that book that Dave Martin wrote along with Peter Coe, Better Training for Distance Runners, is a must read for any up and coming coach, I believe. I'm curious, Mike, if you were teaching a class on effective coaching, and not just athletics coaching, but more like the relational side of coaching. We can extend this to any type of leadership position, right? What qualities would you say coaches should strive to develop?
Listening.
That's it.
It's all about,
Right,
it's about hearing what's going on, not just seeing what's going on, but hearing what's going on, and having a direct dialogue and asking the right questions. And those are critical. And working with the participant, whether it be an athlete or another professional, is working with them in tandem to understand and develop goals. I'm not going to tell you what your goal is. We're going to work towards determining what is an appropriate goal, and finally to focus on always setting everybody up to succeed.
Yeah. Having worked with such a wide range of athletes throughout your career, what's it like? What's the difference between working with an elite runner versus someone who might just be hoping to break 4 in the marathon, let's say?
Um, it's oftentimes it's recreational for some people and it's business for other people. So, the amount of discipline they're going to be willing to undergo. So without discipline, there is no progress. That's all there is to it. You've got to be, you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's not just during the period of time that you're training. It's in that entire period between workouts and making good decisions. So as a coach, your number one objective is to help people make good decisions. And if you make enough good decisions for a long enough period of time, then it becomes behavioral. And not only does it become behavioral in your athletic career, but it carries over into all other facets of your life.
Beautifully said. I agree with that 100%. I heard you say that, and not during this interview, but I've heard you say that high school coaching might be the next step for you somewhere down the road. What challenges you think present themselves to the high school coach in particular?
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly why I would consider coaching at the high school level, is because you can help make a difference. You can really, help set young people, up to succeed and help mold them and help them understand decision making that again will carry over into the rest of it. So that would be my motivation for wanting to coach at the high school level. And the challenges, a lot of the challenges, they're really kind of social challenges. A lot of that, there's just so many distractions out there. So again, good goal setting is critical. I get asked by high school parents all the time, that they think that their kid is going to be the next great superstar, and maybe they will be, but they say, they're looking for the secret. Everybody's looking for the secret. And moms and dads ask me all the time, it's like, what one thing can my kid do to become a better runner? And they never like my answer. And they walk away like really frustrated. But the number one thing you can do is to keep a training log. It's much easier than it sounds like, and but it's so critical because it creates all these benchmarks going backwards. From it, you learn mistakes that you made in training, overtraining. You can see what you did when you had success. You can develop patterns and those sorts of things. But keeping the training log, and the training log, it will keep you honest. If somebody says, how many miles did you run this week? And I ran 42. Well, and you go back and you count them and say, oh, this is only 36. But when you count it up in your training log, you're going to have the right number. You're going to know what it is. So at any rate, the training log, like the track and the stopwatch, keep you honest. I think that it's an incredibly important tool. It sounds so silly and simplistic, but it is probably the most important weapon to have in your arsenal as a runner.
Yeah, and it creates that discipline, right, that you were alluding to earlier. And if you're doing it the way you do it, Mike, which is on legal pads, you're inclined to write more than if you were to upload your workout into Strava.
I think so. Yeah, writing it, and it's therapeutic. You remember, it gives you a lot of information. And boy, you never want to write in a 0 if you don't have to.
Well, earlier I was mentioning before we started recording that I'm a PE teacher. I work with 5 to 12-year-olds. So selfishly, I have to ask you this question. What do you think of the club scene for 12 and under in terms of AAU meets? Do you think that's a good thing for kids to be involved in? I guess it depends on the situation, but any general thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's any time you're getting kids out to do, it's just outside and off of their devices is great, and it creates great social skills. It creates confidence. There's just so much to it. It doesn't matter how you run, but it's developmental on all these other paths. And if you happen to run great, fantastic. You'll see that so many of the great runners in the United States and elsewhere, they started running as kids. They might be 10,000-meter runners today, but they were running the 200 meters in junior high track and that sort of thing. It's a nice way to develop. But I don't think that the only way to develop runners is through running. Other sports, like swimming and soccer. Soccer in particular has developed so many athletes have come from those other couple sports. So I don't know that it's necessary to do youth AAU track, but to participate in sport, and all that sport delivers and all the lessons and things are really great for character building and discipline and confidence going forward.
Well said. Okay, the final segment of the episode is our training segment. Why don't we begin, Mike, with you describing what a typical week of training looked like in the 80s when you were running 225 in the marathon, like what a Monday through Sunday schedule would have looked like for you?
Oh, well, don't try this at home. We didn't know much about exercise physiology. There wasn't that much real true science out there. So the way we got better was to just try to outwork everybody. We're outwork it. Just, you basically trained until you broke, and then you trained again until you broke, and you trained again until you broke. And we'd break a lot, but we were still young and dumb. So we'd come back and do it again. But my generation was really about the 100-mile week, and in order to run 100 miles in a week, you got to get 15 a day, 15 times 7, 105. So that was always the goal, 100 miles, got to run 100 miles. Did we run more? Yeah, sometimes we ran in excess of 100, and really, off week was 70 or 75. But it generally was doubles on Monday through Friday, and maybe and then compete on Saturday, and then a long run on Sunday. And so the long runs were typically 15 to 22 miles, somewhere in there, depending what you're training for, depending on who you were running with. And it was always you trained a lot with other people, because you were on teams, and you were on college teams, or you were on AAU teams. And for me, it was my standard morning run was an 8-mile loop of Golden Gate Park, and then in the afternoon, intervals or hill repeats or whatever, so 8 and 7, something like that, and you got your 105 miles, got to write them down in your training log. And if you survived, you did some good racing. We were so aerobically fit, but we didn't have a lot of the advantages. Shoes were not that good during those days. They weren't compression molded EVA. They were just sheet EVA. They were it's no wonder that the guys my age are broken and crippled. But yeah, it's kind of like that. Just blue collar running.
Okay. Was that training polarized in the sense that, okay, let me explain what I mean. If you were doing a 15-mile day and you went for an 8-miler in the morning, and then you said sometimes you'd come back in the afternoon and do hills or an interval workout, maybe that was like twice a week. I'm assuming you weren't doing hills and intervals every day. How fast would you run that 8-miler? Was it an easy run, or were you pushing the pace close to your marathon pace?
Yeah, morning run, really simple, just getting out and working out the kinks. It just usually is a jogathon, with your buddies, and just shooting the breeze, just being out there. That's what it was. So there generally wasn't any stress on the morning runs. Yeah. But the afternoons, that's another story. You're always training with other guys, and there's always somebody who feels good, which always dictated the tempo and the pace, and it's like, but yeah, no. To answer your question, the morning runs all really casual, easy runs.
Okay. And then I imagine the long run was similar. You'd start out easy maybe, and then you start getting after it.
Yeah, well, the group runs that I had the privilege of running with on Sundays for during my the height of my career, there'd be typically 12, 13, 15, 20 guys show up, and I was the middle of the packer, at 225 marathon. Now we'd have a couple 214 guys and a couple 217 guys and 420, 220, so and again there was always somebody feeling good. So we might start out casually for a mile, but then the tempo inevitably picked up. So and it would kind of split apart. But at any rate, yeah, no, the Sunday long runs we'd end up running. We run pretty hard. Yeah.
And like you said, exercise physiology hadn't really entered into the picture back then. So when we talk about periodization and how you would start the season one way and maybe evolve your workouts, what I'm trying to say is, would all your weeks look very similar back then? Or how would you think about maybe varying the workouts as you got closer to the race?
So as you got closer to the bigger races, your volume would cut back a bit, and the speed of your interval training, your repetitions would get faster. But that was kind of the way it evolved. We didn't do periodization. We didn't do 9 days of a training block and with 2 to 3 days of easy and then do another block. We didn't do blocks. We just ran hard most of the time. But the evolution of the season was that you were trying to peak towards the end of the season. So little less volume, and definitely, a higher intensity and speed.
Great. Yeah, and the type of schedule you've described is also evidence-based training, in my opinion, because there were a lot of things you guys were doing that we'd be happy to see runners doing today, incorporating into their schedule, like the long run and the hills, just the consistency that you put forth all those years. What do you think, in addition to maybe what I just mentioned, are some of the other truths that emerge from 1970s, 80s style training that have remained a part of your training philosophy 40 years later?
Interesting you should mention that. Volume is critical. I mean, basically, you're trying to become as efficient, aerobically efficient as is possible. And so the best way to do that is to have volume into your training. I don't believe that volume needs to be, it needs to, again, be optimal. Back then, we didn't do optimal. We just ran hard or harder, but the thing is, as you learned probably from your Von Aken training, was that it's just a matter of, like you mentioned, just trying to become as aerobically efficient as is possible. But you want to do so without beating yourself up. You don't want to just dig a hole. That's where optimality comes in. If you just train hard and harder and harder, you're eventually going to break. And if you train, harder than what is the most physiologically efficient for your current level of conditioning, I have to emphasize that, for your current level of conditioning, then training over and above and beyond what is optimal is a total waste of time. All it does is it makes you less fit, not more fit. You may as well just sit on the couch and have a Coors Light and some Ruffles. You'd be fitter than if you went out and did that hard workout. So there's
Yeah, it is that period of rest between sessions that allows the body to adapt and get stronger. Absolutely. So then the converse of that question would be, what would you do differently in your training, knowing what we know now about sports science?
Yeah, again, probably not run as much hard stuff as we did, not as frequent. And as I know now, I'm very confident now that the bulk of your fitness takes place in the recovery phase. It's not the workout that makes you fitter, it's what you do in between workouts. And in terms of your recovery, that'll enhance your fitness building blocks. And so, as I do today, I did not do back in the day, was the focus, the absolute concentration and focus first and foremost on the recovery phase in between workouts.
Yeah. When you consider the competitive age grouper, specifically the ones who are out there running without someone to guide their training, are there any common training errors? And maybe the fact that they're under recovering could be one of these errors that they're making. What can we caution them against in addition to that?
Are they training enough? Or is there a high enough percentage of what they're doing specific to what the goal is? Or are they just going out and hobby jogging? You've got to have applied stress in the training, and that, so without that, you won't really improve. You can improve to a certain degree, but if you want to, be competitive, you have to have those optimal stress sessions. And so understanding what they are, having some resources to be able to determine what's the appropriate stress level. By stress, I mean speed, distance, all of those sorts of things. So it's not, you don't get much better. Well, I mean, if you're coming from a zero, you're going to, just by going out and running most days, you're going to improve from having not run. But if you're trying to get to a point where you're tapping your potential, then it takes structure and it takes the practical application of stress loads.
Yeah. Well, and earlier you mentioned that individualization is a big one for you. It's one of your big pillars of training. So if you have two athletes of similar ages, experience level, and current fitness, what factors would determine how they train in your opinion? Because most likely you're not going to have two people train exactly the same way. So how would you fit the athlete to how would you fit the program to the athlete?
Well, yeah, the very first step is being able to determine, the differential in current level of conditioning. And how you do that is you have a time trial, So when I would train groups of athletes, day one, first workout, everybody knew what was coming up, in each, period. We'd start each period with 2-mile time trial on the track, everybody doing the same thing at the same time. So that's the one time when everybody gets to do the same thing. And from there, we have, benchmarks. We've got everybody's particular time. This is your current level of conditioning. So therefore, your repetitions, when we come back next week and we're going to do speed workout, here's the workout. It's, 6 times 800 meters with a 200-meter recovery based upon your current level of conditioning as demonstrated by your 2-mile time trial. These are the paces that you should be running, and don't be running them faster than that. And in my case, I would pull athletes off the track if they were running too fast. We're not getting any better here, So, and you have to understand, that this is what's optimal. This is what we're going to do. So I think that the benchmarking comes from the time trial.
Yeah, and from that time trial, now that you mention it, how do you envision, or how do you think about the different energy systems or the different training zones for your athletes? Like there's a threshold zone, there's that easy zone. So how do you compartmentalize that?
So I would use a 9 or 10-day training block, and and so it's like making soup. You've got lots of different ingredients, and we want to make sure we have the correct balance of the different ingredients, whether it be volume, whether it be absolute speed, neuromuscular speed, anaerobic threshold. And we try to make sure that if those are, let's just assume that those are the three key components, that we make sure that we have each of those interspersed with adequate recovery within the training block, and then regroup and start another training block, and repeat, rinse and repeat,
Yeah, yeah. I think it would be very helpful to describe some sample workouts, and we can choose any distance you've been thinking about lately. Maybe it's for yourself, maybe it's the 800, the mile. A few sample workouts you might do in the late stages of a training cycle, or if you prefer to talk about the early stage of the training cycle for that particular event.
Well, it really depends on the distance that one is getting ready for. But if I was to say, like, what's the magic workout, just throw something out there that's the magic workout. I like 4 minutes. 4 minutes is like the perfect marriage of speed and endurance. It's almost exactly where aerobic meets anaerobic. So 4 minute repeats. If you're not going to do anything else, go out and run 4 minute repeats with 3 to 4 minutes recovery jog. That's a thing of beauty. That marries that, and is just a very elegantly way to marry aerobic and anaerobic.
Yeah, that's a staple, by the way, of my training plans, and I lean heavily on Joe Vigil, who also really liked those mile repeats for his athletes.
4 minute mile repeats? Oh,
or 1200.
4 minute repeats are more like 850 meters or whatever.
Yeah, and that's another good point, Mike. I don't know about you, but I prefer to prescribe training in minutes instead of distance.
Minutes, unless it's on the track. On the track, use the track and the segments of the track, understanding pace, tempo, splits. You learn so much from running on the track. But if it's not on the track, you can get the same basic fitness by running, 4 times 4 minutes with 2.5 minutes recovery out on a flat road surface.
Yeah. Well, look, I've learned a lot from you today, Mike. I'm sure our listeners have too. But as we wrap up here, is there anything I left out that you want to emphasize, whether it's about training or coaching in general, or just even running fandom, that you would like to leave us with?
If there was one thing we didn't get to, we talked about what's optimal and that sort of a thing. There's a tool. It's an old-fashioned tool that I think is really extraordinarily worthwhile and an amazing predictor of current level of conditioning. And that is the computerized tables by Jerry Purdy. The old standard book is about this size. That is, from a coaching stance, is a phenomenal tool to be able to determine, what the athlete might be, their condition is at relative to if they've run XYZ at this distance, what they might be able to do at a different distance. And by plotting that, what those margins are, you can kind of create an interpretation and a better understanding of if they're going to be more have greater potential at something a little bit longer or something a little bit shorter, and then between. But if you haven't looked into the computerized training tables, the original ones by Jerry Purdy, I would go way out of my way to recommend that particular tool. Pretty cool. It's it is way ahead of its time.
Thank you. And out of curiosity, what would the difference be between the Purdy tables and something like the Jack Daniels B-dot tables and the McMillan chart?
Yeah, I love the McMillan charts. I love the B-dot tables, but Purdy was just the first one. It was just a really great manual right there. But yeah, and to this day, I'll use the McMillan tables. It's not, it might not be as precise, but they're really user friendly. I very, very much like those. And of course, from an exercise physiological stance, you know, the VDOT is extraordinary. So there, there's no absolute black and white, but these are the kinds of tools and things that get you in the right direction and keep you on the right track. Pun intended.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to wrap up. Mike, if someone from our listener base wants to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Real easy to find on Facebook, Mike Fanelli. And that's generally the way I communicate with the running and track and field community.
Okay, I'll include that in the show notes, although it's very easy to remember. And Mike, thank you for sharing your time, being so generous with your wealth of knowledge, and good luck in your upcoming marathon.
Thanks an awful lot. I'll need every bit of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it, Mike. I hit the stop button. We're no longer recording. That was insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it flowed real nicely. It felt natural, and that's really important when you do these sorts of things. Just be able to have a good kind of casual, candid dialogue, right?
Oh yeah, and after doing over 40 of these, I can always tell immediately after or even during when I have good chemistry with someone, and you and I just feel like we have a very good chemistry.
Yeah, I felt like we've known each other for a long time. So
yeah.
we've run a couple 100 miles together.
And it's true that my first marathon was at age 18 and I ran a 3:36.
And did I tell you what my first marathon was?
Wasn't it that? Wasn't it at age 16? And you ran a 3:36?
Yes, sir. 3:36. Same damn time.
Yeah.
Same damn time. How funny is that?
It was so interesting to see that coincidence. Although my PB is not 2:25. You got me beat there.
I started a little early.
Yeah.
I didn't finish my first marathon at age 15. But I was determined to come back at 16 and nail it. But that was a very painful 3:36. How about you?
Oh, just the hubris entering that marathon, not knowing what I was getting into. Starting too fast, made the classic mistake thinking, oh, I'm a 17-minute 5K runner. I should be able to handle this.
Yeah. Likewise. I died a horrible death.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I would love to run 3:36 now. That we won't be seeing that number. But
yeah,
that's okay.
I think I'm headed down your path of focusing more on the track as I get older.
It's really fun. It keeps you sprightly. You can always, if you're in 1 mile shape, you can run anything. You can. Well, look at Steve Ovett. He'd be able to take that mile fitness and he'd run great cross country. He'd run great half marathons. So if you're always in, within 10 or 15 seconds of what your maximal is mile, if you're in good mile condition, you can do anything with that.
Yeah,
it's fun.
And I had a real back scare in the last year. I've developed some lower back pain that I think was a result of really high mileage for me. I mean, I was doing 2 hours a day. It was kind of silly. I was experimenting with high loads of training and I developed this back issue. And I'm not even 40 years old yet, but I feel like an old man sometimes.
Real low in your back?
Yeah, and it extended into my left hip. So I got that checked out they still don't know what it is, but anyhow, I decided.
You know what this is? The entire conversation, I've had this electro stim machine on my lower back and hip.
Oh, okay.
So I know what you're saying. Yeah, it's the pounding, just the general pounding that it really gets you on that. Like this week for me, it's been my coccyx, right at the very, very base of the spine. We're all up in that hip row. So what do you do for it?
Right now, I'm doing lots of yoga. That has helped, and focusing on my core.
Yeah.
Things that I never thought about before.
Do you do planks?
Planks are a part of my routine.
Yeah.
After that, I'm at a loss, Mike. I don't know if I should start strength training like traditional deadlift, squatting, to strengthen my back, or if I may make it worse?
I would do. I would start by doing some squats, very gentle, with no weight. Just doing squats. Just doing squats at home. Just you know, 15 or 20. Just to start. And just that would be one good thing. But start really easy and see if the risk is it going to aggravate things further.
Right.
And so you'll find out You'll find out really quickly. I've solved some of my own back problems recently with planking. Just wasn't doing much in the way of that core stuff, and that really seemed to help. The other thing one of the things I do on a daily basis is soak in a hot bath of Epsom salt.
Okay.
I do it religiously, and I have for a long time. And I take these handfuls of the Epsom salt, and I use 2 or 3 pounds at a time. So I go through a lot of Epsom salt. But and I take the handfuls of it and scoop it and turn it into a salve and rub it in there. And boy, it's amazing how much relief I get, not just for my back, but on other body parts. It's one of those things we're talking about, the ancillary stuff that you do in between. That's one of the very best things that I do. I think that the other things is supplementation is really good. So glucosamine sulfate with MSM, and then collagen with hyaluronic acid. Those sorts of things kind of are good for bones and tendons, and that really kind of helps, recovery, and helps the back and all the other parts too.
Okay, I'm really taking all this advice to heart, because it has crossed my mind. What if I can't run? Soon I won't be able to even go for a jog, and this sport is everything to me.
Well, I like the handheld electro stim machine. If you can get your hands on one of those. I've got a couple of handheld lasers here. They spend a lot of time on my hip and on my back. So, you just do other stuff. I don't know, body work. I've had a lot of rolfing done and that sort of stuff, deep tissue work. And I do that once a week. I have deep tissue work done, but it's a combination of just doing all the stuff all the time and always having an awareness about yourself and how you move, right?
Stay away from chiropractors. Would you say not to go there?
What I like in chiropractic, my best friend is a chiropractor. It's funny, we were training partners for a long time, and in the mid '80s there, we were training partners, and he came from a running background but became a triathlete, and so he and I were like the key endurance athletes, the two top endurance athletes in San Francisco at the time. And the same time, the same year that I won the San Francisco Pacific Rim Marathon, he won the Escape from Alcatraz. And he's like me; he's a little guy. He's like me. He's an East Coast guy, and a little guy. He's like, what am I, 5'9"? He's probably only 5'8", 138 pounds, but strong as hell. And he's a chiropractor, so you got to be strong. But the thing about chiropractic, the facet of chiropractic, what I was going to get to is I don't mind chiropractic, but the chiropractors who do ART, active release therapy, that's the bomb. ART. Okay. Oh man, there's a combination of some deep tissue and stretching and mobility stuff, but yeah, if you can find a really good ART therapist, they're generally going to be from the chiropractic field, and it's amazing the relief you can get by a really good ART practitioner.
Thank you. Yeah, yep. I've had ART done on my Achilles tendon, but I guess it can work for your lower back too.
Oh yeah. So, maybe even more effective on a lower back than Achilles. So.
Okay, good to know. And
what you training for? Are you getting ready for something?
Just the local, circuit, the local 5Ks. I don't have to do anything longer than a 5K. I'm happy just going for that shorter stuff we talked about. And since I don't travel much at the moment, it's not like I'm shooting for a destination type race. I just like to be healthy again and not have to worry every day if my back is going to give out.
Yeah. Well, don't throw in the towel. You just have to find the formula that works to keep your back, so all good distance runners, are carrying some niggly thing or another. whether it's their Achilles or it's their calf or it's their back or everybody's got something, and throughout the course of your career, you'll have a whole wide variety of different things. And so it's about, constantly being in management mode, and just and learn what the recipe is. And that's why you keep a training log. So you can write down, all the different modalities you used that day, all the different modalities, and you can find some kind of a trend in those modalities.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, one of the many wise things you said today is what you do in between the training matters. I think this problem emerged because I was carrying my kids, my students, these little ones, and I was like spinning them, and that caused havoc
Oh
in the
yeah.
back.
Well, especially when you're already, you're running 2 hours a day, your body doesn't work the same. So what, being really body awareness, everything you do with forethought, it's kind of like a Zen thing, So I walk very slowly, and my wife is like, come on, will you hurry up? And I say, you can run really fast. I say, I'm just being very thoughtful about my movement, So that's the way you get to be 66 and still be able to run.
You eventually moved into real estate. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I did 17 years in high-level sports marketing, and then I've been doing real estate. This is my 25th year. And what I do is I sell things like the property behind me here in this photograph. I sell large, vineyards and wineries and estates, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, because I might need another career after a few years.
Oh, yeah, well, it's a really interesting business. I know a number of other people from our sport who do this business, and we all do very, very well. The discipline it takes to do this, the visualization, the concentration, and all that sort of stuff that you get from the sport. But yeah, there's I know a number of other runners and track and field people that have been able to transfer their passion from one business and into this, and it can be pretty lucrative.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you any longer, Mike. You've been such a great guest.
I was going to say teachers make great real estate professionals.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to think I need to, give this some more thought.
I have a good friend there in Orlando named Miranda Cady, Cady. She's like the top agent at Sotheby's, which is the brokerage firm that I'm with. But she's the Orlando people. But yeah, it's cool. I didn't begin till I was 40.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and I'm 37. Okay.
And so it's a good time. You've got just enough life experience and relationships and contacts and background that it's actually a good kind of time to think about doing that. I had a friend of mine who was a competitor of mine. Like a competitor that we didn't like each other. We just and it's like we would run each other into the ground in a race. And I was not a nice guy a couple of times. I remember out and back, of course, when we'd hit the turnaround, I'd sit on him and we hit the turnaround, and just before the turnaround, I'd throw down the hammer, and he'd be so pissed, At any rate, he came from his whole life he came from a real estate background, and we eventually became friends. And he thought that he tried to talk me into doing the business so that I could work at his brokerage firm. And I just said, yeah. Well, eventually, I was in between the gigs, and I said, all right, I'll give it a try. And then I never looked back. So it's not for everybody, but your marketplace is a really strong, very vibrant marketplace. So
okay.
I wouldn't discourage you from doing so.
Thank you, Mike. If years into the future, I might have to look back on this conversation and give you a lot of credit for helping show me that.
Well, I enjoyed our time today, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll be publishing this tomorrow. This is episode 41, and through email, I'll send you ways that you can listen and share if you'd like to do that.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it. All right.
Good night. Thanks.
Have a good night, man.